Ethanol, otherwise referred to as C2H6O, is a simple alcohol that has been around for quite some time, and it's a main ingredient for the lovely corn juice that we pump into our race cars. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, on today's episode of the Build Sheet, we are going to be, I said build. On today's episode of the Build Sheet, we are going to be talking about E85. Since as early as the 15th century, in the form of moonshine whiskey, we have been making what we know today as ethanol or ethyl alcohol. It wouldn't be until a few hundred years later that a man by the name of Samuel Morey thought, hey, instead of maybe like drinking all this stuff and just forgetting the days before, we could maybe put it into a little more of a practical use. Born in 1762, Morey was an early American inventor who loved working on engines way back in the day. After he got his start with steam-powered ships, he eventually moved on to internal combustion engines. While he was messing around with different fuels and vapors, he discovered that the vapors of a certain distilled fluid, when mixed with air, became explosive. And that certain distilled fluid was in fact not ethanol, but turpentine, or distilled pine tree resin. But however, not too long after that discovery, he ended up developing the first internal combustion engine that ran on a mixture of ethanol and turpentine in the year 1826. Now fast forward a few more years and we see the birth of cars sporting engines that ran off of pure ethanol. One example being the 1896 quadricycle built by our good old friend Henry Ford. The 20th century brought a huge interest in the production of ethanol, with the first US ethanol plant being built in 1940 by the US Army in Omaha, Nebraska. It wouldn't be until many years later that ethanol blended gasoline would be available to the public because, believe it or not, regular gasoline was cheaper at the time. Now today, after years of different amendments and mandates and clean energy acts and flex fuel cars, our favorite quick trip tanks are filled with ethanol blended gasoline. We see our normal blends contain up to a 10% ethanol content, even E15, E20, and probably the one we know as car enthusiasts the most, E85. Now E85, as its name suggests, is a blend of ethanol and gasoline with, believe it or not, a mixture ratio of 85% ethanol to 15% hydrocarbon gasoline. Now of course this mixture varies depending on the time of the year and the climate that you may live in. And since its introduction to the market, people have found that it can be very beneficial to someone who wants to get more power out of their engine. But how? How does simply switching fuel give you more horsepower? Well, it's 110 octane.
In theory, it's race fuel.
Now, obviously, there's a little more that goes into making your car faster, other than just switching which pump you pull up next to on your next fill-up, but we will get into that in just a second. All right, cool. It's 110 octane. That really doesn't explain much, right? So let's get into the science of why corn makes cars go faster. If we go back into the basics of how engines work, we know that they rely on a mixture of oxygen and a fuel source which is compressed and then ignited. And as we know from adding our eBay cold air intakes, more air is, well, better. So when we look at E85, the ethanol that makes up that 85% of that gas carries 30% oxygen and 70% hydrogen and carbon. So when E85 is sprayed through your injectors, or carb if you're a carb guy, you are introducing liquid oxygen straight into your engine, which will now demand less air coming in from your intake. With ethanol being an alcohol-based fuel, it requires more heat to vaporize than regular gasoline, which in turn reduces the air intake temperatures of your engine, which again, as we know, colder intake tends to allow for colder air, which in turn is more dense. Cars running E85 are able to run a much higher compression ratio due to E85's knock resistance. A car running E85 can safely run a compression ratio of 14:1. With the right tune and supporting modifications, you can see a really nice increase of horsepower and torque out of a naturally aspirated engine. A good intake and a free-flowing exhaust with an E85 tune can really wake up your car. And as far as turbocharged engines go, running E85 on a boosted vehicle is like grabbing a gold star power-up in Mario Kart. With regular pump gas, you're limited to running around 12 to 15 pounds of boost safely. However, when you introduce E85 into your tank, you can expect to run double that amount. We see turbo cars that are tuned on E85 running 30 to 35 pounds of boost and pumping out some absolutely mad horsepower. So this all sounds really cool, right? I mean, just by switching fuels, I can make more horsepower, have a lot more fun with my car. Yes and no. When you switch to a fuel with a high ethanol content and a much higher octane rating, you need to have your car tuned. Whether this be an off-the-shelf tune or having it professionally tuned by a professional with a dyno, you're gonna need to have the car tuned. If you expect to pull up to the closest E85 pump with your stock WRX expecting a huge increase in horsepower, you're not going to have a really fun time when all of your check engine lights come on and start flashing a few miles down the road. And some older cars also require additional fuel component upgrades as well. So if you're a DSM guy or gal, you might want to look at upgrading your fuel pump and injectors too. And of course, also if you want to make sure you keep all that new power that you just gained actually grip to the road, you can get some new wider wheels and tires over at fitmentindustries.com. That's a plug. Moving on. And as far as those rumors about E85 rotting away fuel tanks and corroding fuel lines and just causing a whole heap of mess with engines, you can just consider them rumors because it's not true. It doesn't do that. So if you're looking to make the switch to E85, great. Just keep in mind that your gas mileage is going to be absolute shit, and unless you plan on buying a flex fuel kit that is able to adjust your tune on the fly to different ethanol content, you probably might want to keep a map of all your local E85 pumps. So all in all, running E85 is a great way to get more horsepower out of your car. And it doesn't cost nearly as much as race fuel, and it's a hell of a lot more readily available than race fuel. So hopefully this video gave you a little more insight into what E85 actually is, what it does for your car, and what to expect if you actually want to run it. Don't forget, if you need wheels, tires, or suspension, don't forget to check out fitmentindustries.com, where you can choose from over 1 million wheel and tire packages that are mounted, balanced, and shipped to your door for free in the lower 48. Let us know your thoughts on E85 down in the comments below, and let us know what you would like to see covered in the next episode of The Build Sheet. I'm Gels. We'll see you later. Peace.